this. And oh, here's a chance for me to mention a little bit too. This has the information about diseases incorporated into it. So if you hated that in the chapter about Protus, where I took like all the disease stuff and put it in here, you're going to come across the same thing. Am I going to ask you about all the disease, the treatments and all that? But you might be wondering about it. So here it, talks more about what happens. But I'm not going to ask you that kind of information. But do you think I want you to know that not only is chlamydia something that is a sexually transmitted disease, but do you think I want you to know about it causing trachoma? For sure that I would. So sometimes there'll be some things that we talk about that really have to do with the disease itself, and other times we won't. But that's where all that extra information is coming in. It's coming from, I think it's like chapter 39, I think. That might be on the outside for you. Oh yeah, it's 38. Never mind. So chlamydias can also cause other things. There's chlamydia pneumoniae that also is associated with pneumonia. There's chlamydia psittaci, which I don't think it's in your notes here. It comes in at some other time, which causes that parrot fever. Chlamydia psittaci, it causes psittacosis, it's called. And it's one of the reasons why they will quarantine birds coming in from other countries. So you know how it got popular for people to get all kinds of tropical birds, but people could pick up diseases from the birds. That was one of them, psittacosis. That's also a chlamydia. Okay, so the group chlamydia, are you raising your hand? Gabby? Oh, it's called psittaci. It like starts with a P. It's like P-S-S-I, psittaci, T-I-C-I, I think. Psittacosis. So you don't have to know the other examples. We're just mentioning them because that like helps you understand that, and again see all the different organisms that are out there. Now we're going into another group, and we're going to have kind of the same thing. We're going to have a group with some characteristics, and then we're going to have a few examples. This group are the spirochetes. So when we talked about shapes of organisms, and they said about something like spirochete, and I said, really that's kind of a weird way to put it in here because it really isn't a shape. The spirochetes really are a group of organisms that are really unique. So like chlamydia, the spirochetes are also a group of organisms that have some specific characteristics. So what I want you to know about the spirochetes is that, of course, they have that shape. They are flexible, helical-shaped organisms. Flexible. They are motile with an axial filament, or periplasmic flagella, which is something that was mentioned when we talked about motility in chapter 3. Okay, so they're flexible. That kind of makes them different than the other organisms that are spiral-shaped. There's a lot of organisms in here that are going to be examples that you might be interested in. Here's just kind of a picture of what they look like up close. The axial filament. Kind of more details about the axial filament. But what's important about the spirochetes also is that they're very difficult to grow. So they're very difficult. They're not obligate intracellular parasites, but they're almost. They're very, very difficult to grow. They usually need to be grown in a living source or something like cell or tissue cultures. So this, before I kind of go to those other slides, this kind of gives you like some of the examples in here. We are going to talk about Treponema pallidum. Treponema here, it'll come up because that's the cause of syphilis. We're going to talk about Borrelia burgdorferi because that's the cause of Lyme disease. But I also might mention at this time Leptospira interrogans. causes leptospirosis. So those of you with pets, you might be aware that at least dogs, I think dogs and cats both, are vaccinated against leptospirosis. Leptospirosis is something that, if anybody's been to Hawaii and you go swimming in some of the natural waters, oftentimes they have a sign up saying, caution leptospirosis, because it's something that they battle with a lot more in Hawaii. And that's something that's kind of common. Basically, it's carried by rodents. So what's a concern for us having pets is that rodents like rats or mice might, go over to the dog's water bowl or cat's water bowl, and then they're drinking water and they urinate into the water, and that's how the pet will get it. And it's just something that can cause a lot of problems like high fever and encephalitis and things like that in serious forms. So here, our first example then, we'll go with Lyme disease, Borrelia burgdorferi, just because it's in here in this order. It's important for you to know about Borrelia burgdorferi. So now we have spirochetes as a group, and we also have to know about Borrelia burgdorferi. So you can see how this could start getting overwhelming if you don't keep up with these. It's important for you to know about Lyme disease, because Lyme disease is something that does affect us here, even though it's named Lyme disease came from Lyme, Connecticut, because in other parts of the US, it's even a bigger problem than it is here. But this is spread by ticks. So here you think like we don't have that many ticks. If you go out hiking a lot and you especially go into areas where you're off the trail, it's not that difficult to pick up a tick in brush like that. But if you live in some area where it's a lot more humid, like my cousin lived in Missouri, and she said like if they went anywhere on their farm, like you would get ticks. In Connecticut, in the areas around like Lyme, where this was first discovered, it was discovered because there was an epidemic of rheumatoid arthritis in children. So you probably have heard of rheumatoid arthritis, and you probably know that it's not contagious, right? How could there be an epidemic? That gives you a little bit of idea about how severe the symptoms can be. Rheumatoid arthritis, where people get, disfigured joints, and their joints hurt and become very swollen, and there's a lot of pain and a lot of, inability to move well and such. So it is something that can be very serious in the short term, but even worse is that if it's not treated properly, especially early on, people can end up with years and years of suffering from it. So it's just something that is probably a lot more prevalent than anybody thinks it is, because once you pass through the initial stages, then the symptoms are much like symptoms of all kinds of other things, like you're achy, you have swollen joints, you have no energy, you're sickly, you could look like you have lots of diseases, or you could even look like you're one of those people that just complains, like the chronic fatigue kind of thing, or fibromyalgia. Now they're being able to recognize more about that, but in the beginning, people that were suffering with those things, like after a while, the doctors pretty much think like, oh, it's just this person who's just complaining about things all the time. So it's difficult to diagnose it if it goes on, because nobody puts the two things together. Yes?
Are you saying those are really Lyme disease, or
They could be. There are types of symptoms that people could get later on. So early on, you could go hiking, you could get a tick. Some days later, you will have something known as a bullseye rash. If you see the bullseye rash, it looks like this. It's just a round rash. Sometimes it looks even more like a bullseye than this. If you had that, then you were kind of lucky, because you went to the doctor and then you got treated for it, and then you could recover from it. Only only a certain percentage of people get the bullseye rash. And kind of oddly, not everybody even has any idea that they even had a tick bite. Because you kind of think, like, how could somebody not know they had a tick? Because some of the ticks that are responsible for carrying this are like this small. The tip of a pen or pencil. So you could get like a little bug like that and not necessarily know. It has like a blood meal. It stays on for, you know, a while, and then it drops off and you never even knew that you had it.
But don't usually when ticks bite, like if they got on a dog, they swell up.
Well, those ones that are on a dog, like those dermacentric ticks, those are huge.
Oh, okay.
Like it would be hard not to know that you had that. But see here, this is more like the one that you would see on a dog. And this is more like the Ixodes tick that is associated with that. But they've also found the organism in a lot of other things. They found it in reptiles. They found it, I know, in like lizards in Fraser Park. They don't really know, like, there could be a lot more to know about this disease than what we know now. Right now, we think that it's passed by ticks, that it's more common in other areas. But I know that, like, there's somebody that's been suffering for years that works at Placerita Canyon, that got it at Placerita Canyon. I know people have gotten it at Towsley Canyon, hiking here. So you just don't want to go hiking without being prepared. And so being prepared means using those sprays and also dressing appropriately. Because like when people go hiking here, what do they wear? Shorts, maybe hiking boots with socks, maybe, or just tennis shoes. You really, when you go into these areas, you're supposed to wear long pants. You're supposed to put stuff around your ankles, and you're supposed to, and everybody like always like laughs and like swears they're never going to do this, wear your socks over the top of your pant leg. That's how you should be going into these areas. Did you guys just laugh just for that, or just because I said people usually laugh because they're like, I'm not going hiking like that?
I wouldn't do that.
You wouldn't do that. You'd rather just get one. You who wrote the paper on Lyme disease, it didn't scare you?
Not really. I don't really go out into the wilderness.
Okay, but I would hardly call Placerita Canyon the wilderness.
Okay, well, I don't do that either.
I just remember like, okay, I know some of you guys know Betty Rose, right? Yeah. I mean, now she retired, so like whoever's been here recently, but we were always arguing about these kinds of things, and we had all gone up to Santa Barbara, and she would swear because they no, you don't need to do that. No, there's no ticks. You'll never get a tick. I was in Malibu Canyon. I got a tick twice in Malibu Canyon. But anyway, we always had this, and the next thing you know, we're driving someplace, and what does she have like crawling on her neck? A tick. So it was always like, see, I told you so. That was only off the side of the road. All we did was like pull over because she wanted to identify some tree that was there. And the next thing you know, she's got a tick crawling on her neck. So like you don't think that. But what if like we didn't notice it, and then you know it falls in your clothes, nobody noticed it, it's already bitten you by the time that you go and you try to take it off. Has anybody ever tried to remove a tick?
Off a dog.
Okay, what about removing a tick from a dog? How successful was that?
You have to like squeeze it.
Why did the chickens get me on fire?
No, that you're not supposed to do that.
I got tweezers.
Yeah. One thing, what did you say? Yeah, and yet, if you read, they'll tell you you're not supposed to do all that stuff. It's a lot harder to get them off than you think. And it actually takes a certain amount of time for them to disengage their teeth. And it takes something like minutes to disengage. So if you pull it off, then basically what happens is you pull off the body, but you leave the mouth parts on there. If you squeeze the tick, you squeeze the Borrelia into the wound. So like you have to make sure that if you use tweezers that you actually tweeze it like at its head rather than on the body part. I know you can't see what I was pointing to, but the body part here. And then if you use something like Vaseline or some of those things that are supposed to make them back out, those aren't very successful and you have to wait a long time. So it's not like as easy as you think that it would be like, oh, well, if I get a tick, then I could just take it off. But it's not that easy. And that like using a match or something like that, oftentimes it like just burns, it like just kills the tick and then it's like stuck on there. So then you have to like get it off that way too.
Are all ticks infected?
No, definitely not. They would have to have picked it up from so if you're in an area that it's more prevalent, it would be easier for it to get, and other animals, can carry it. So, do you remember any of the statistics? Like how many people per year? Well, actually some of this might be in here, let's see. See, this is what's good about having that information from chapter 38 in here. But see here, when you see this localized stage, you might get, I think it's only something like 50% of the people that get the bullseye rash, right? Do you remember that?
I want to say it was a little lower.
Yeah, so it's not like you can't rely on that. Flu-like symptoms. Lots of things give you flu-like symptoms. So you might not be treated at all when you get it because unless you have a bullseye rash or you remember to tell the doctor that you had a tick if you even knew about it. I remember your paper had something about what was the percentage of people that were diagnosed that never remembered having a tick. It was like,
It was like 70%.
yeah, it was just a huge number. And those are the people that were actually diagnosed with it. Most people who have it don't even get diagnosed with it. Most people just have it and then they just suffer. So flu-like symptoms, and then when you see this disseminated stage occurs weeks or months after infection, neurological abnormalities, heart inflammation, arthritis, late stages, and this again, years later, demyelination of neurons, behavioral changes, symptoms resembling Alzheimer's and multiple sclerosis. It's just not something anybody would want to get, right? So you look a little silly wearing your socks outside your pant leg. It's not that big of a deal. Just get like taller hiking boots. But definitely really consider using things like the tick sprays. Okay, so that's Borrelia burgdorferi. So that's good for today. Next time we'll